Right. So for friends who have been with us for the past two sessions, maybe you are not unfamiliar with me, but for the sake of our friends who are new with us today, let me just do a very quick introduction to our forum. So my name is Ning. I'm a family therapist and lead social worker with Viria Community Services. With me this evening is my colleague Ting Ting. She's our moderator for this session who will be hanging out with all of you in the chat room largely. I think you're not unfamiliar with her. She has always been around picking up your questions, answering some of your queries. So Ting Ting, as usual, would you like to say hi to our audience tonight?
Hello everyone. Okay, I remembered to unmute myself today.
Yeah, she's always so absorbed into her things and she'll start telling me a lot of things without me, without unmuting herself. So that's Ting Ting as usual. For us tonight, she'll be helping me out to gather your questions. Feel free to drop your comments, your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as possible we can tonight. Because I did mention at the start of our session that we also have our Facebook live streaming. So for friends who have joined us there, don't worry, we didn't forget about you. So if you do have any questions over there, you can include them in the comment. And I have another colleague, Ruby, who will be helping out to collate the questions. And at the end of the sessions, she'll be passing some of these questions to Ting Ting, and Ting Ting and I will be having a conversation on some of the queries that you have. So why are we doing this Demystifying series? As a family therapist, I would have to say, I have been very privileged to be accompanying many couples on their journey of challenges and really thankfully joy as well. So it's not just the not so pleasant things, but I really have been also very honored to witness a lot of pleasant awareness, a lot of changes in couples. I'm not going to say that having a relationship is the easiest thing in the world, because I truly believe that while love can occur randomly, kind of love at first sight, if you're kind of someone from that camp, maintaining a healthy long-term relationship is by no means random. In fact, it takes a lot of effort and time to bring out the best in the relationship. I remember we had this participant in the first session. I'm not too sure if you remember, Ting Ting. This participant was quite interesting. He actually commented, so if you're here with us this evening, hi to you. You inspired me to think about this. This participant actually mentioned that what are the myths of relationship? And indeed, there are many myths when people have relationships. I hope through this series, we get to have a chance to debunk some of these myths and think about how our relationship has been for us and how we can enhance it with our partner. So in terms of format, I think you might have a glimpse as of now, other than I myself having these whole conversations for the next hour. I think that's going to be a little bit of a bore. But thankfully, from my experience in the past two sessions, I think we have a very active audience pool who have a lot of questions over there. So I would like to encourage all of you to interact with one another in the chat room, because I believe other than me, myself, a lot of you actually come along with a lot of wisdom, a lot of tips for one another in terms of relationships. And if you do have questions that you'd like to bring to our attention, please feel free to type it out in the chat box. I know for audience who have joined us last week, we kind of tried pigeonhole. We did receive some feedback to say, hey, it's kind of a little bit difficult to toggle between two places. I want to listen to what you guys are saying, but at the same time, I want to pose a question. So we haven't quite figured out what's the best way to do this, but what we're going to do tonight is we're going to trouble Ting Ting to help us to collect all the questions once again. Okay, with that done, let's get going. Tonight, we are going to talk about communications. In fact, in the past two sessions, we did talk a little bit about communications along the way. We are talking about how do we go about having effective communications tonight. I actually thought quite hard at tonight's topic because there are honestly so much I can say about communication. Give me 3 days, I'm very sure that I can bring forth a full-fledged workshop in terms of what communication is all about. But we don't have the luxury of 3 full days. So eventually, I think what I decided to do tonight is to share with all of you tonight some of the communication ideas which are most relevant to couples. And the best part is these ideas are highly researched upon. So we do know that universally, these are some of the most common situations that couples tend to face when it comes to communication. So along the way, if you think that there are any other tips or strategy that you might have acquired along your own journey, feel free to pop into the chat box so that the rest of the audience get to benefit from your personal experience. For tonight, my focus will be really sharing on the pitfalls in couple communication, a very common pattern that I see in couples. I'd like to bring to your attention what is the most common pattern that I tend to see in couples communication. And definitely from there, let's not be problem oriented. So after knowing what are the common issues, let's try to take the lead together and take the step forward to see how we can enhance our communication with our partner. Okay. There are many challenges when it comes to couples communication. Tonight, I would largely be referencing Dr. John Gottman's work, where they have found that most of the communication pitfall can be classified into 4 major themes. Gottman and his team called them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And he and his team actually found that couples who ended up in divorce somehow present a lot more of these 4 types of communication styles as compared to couples who stay together. You will tend to see these horsemen showing up most often in conflict. Before we take a look at these 4 horsemen, I would like to remind us that we are all human beings. It is very possible, including I myself, that we have committed some of these acts before. So please, I appeal to you, if you are there with your partner, if let's say any of the sharing later on kind of get a little bit too close to heart because, okay, I think she's talking about you, please don't turn over and stare at your partner with that's you stare, okay? So what is important is that seeing if this happen to be a very regular feature in your communication pattern. If once in a while, I think let's not be too worried about it because indeed, these are usual coping mechanisms. But if you realize that they are coming a little bit more frequent than you would like it to be, then perhaps, hopefully after tonight, you could pick up some ideas of how do you reduce some of the occurrence of this maybe not so helpful communication issue. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce the 4 horsemen that I would really like you to pay attention to. The first horseman is criticisms. This is not quite the same as general complaint. When we talk about criticisms, it tends to take on a more universal stand to it, where often you get the sensing that I don't think he or she is just talking about the behavior per se, but it seems like there is some level, some form of generalization of kind of long-drawn, unresolved complaints. Unlike a complaint that focuses on a specific action, a criticism tends to focus on the person's overall. It tends to take a little bit of an attack on a person's personality or character. Give you some examples. I would probably consider a statement like, say, I wish we can spend more time together. Okay, that probably sounds a little bit of a complaint from the partner to say, okay, I think we haven't been spending too much time together, so I wish we can spend more time together. But a criticism would probably sound more like, you simply don't bother about our relationship. You always place me secondary to everything else. It's always something else that's more important than us. Do you hear the difference? One is about me as your partner wanting us to spend time together. Whereas my second statement sounded a little bit like how you have not put in effort for our relationships. These criticisms also have the tendency to use a lot of you statements. That's why sometimes, in couple, right, especially when someone is very frustrated, very exasperated in the relationship, I tend to hear people telling me, it is always about me, okay? It's always about me. About me not doing things right. So yeah, that's probably a sign to tell me that probably this person who tell me that statement kind of experienced a little bit more criticisms than how he or she would like it to be. I mean, let's face it, none of us like to be criticized. But when it comes to such a regular level, we kind of just generalize and say that It's always about me not being able to do anything right for him or her. Okay, so some of the statements, like another typical you statement, you're always so selfish, where you only think about you being tired. What about me? You are just so unreliable. If you realize that all this wave of communication tends to happen a little bit too frequent, we tend to find the other party feeling a little bit hurt, kind of attacked, and being judged in the relationship. Okay, so that's the first horseman I'd like to introduce you. Is that happening in your relationship? The second horseman that I'd like to introduce you actually tends to follow very closely to the first, especially if you have been in a relationship a little bit longer. So when there are too much criticisms, sometimes it is very easy to kind of swipe them under this second horseman called contempt. When long-term criticisms take place, sometimes we find ourselves taking a very imbalanced power dynamic. What does that mean? It comes to a point in time that perhaps there's some sense of superiority in one party towards the other. Something about how the other party seems to be a bit smaller, kind of a little bit more perceived to be incompetent, is a little bit undesirable at times. And honestly, in my experience working in so many couples, the scary bit is, right, more often than not, that's not the intent of the party who has engaged in a contempt way of communicating. I do find that it tends to sometimes happen very, very unconsciously. And I think I would like to also highlight for Gottman's team, the team who has been working on this 4 communication style, contempt is actually one of the very single greatest predictor of divorce in their study among US couples. Take a look at all these statements 2 of these statements that I've kind of listed in the example. You're just like your dad. I can forget about depending on you to take care of me. It sounds kind of like belittling. It kind of drags in family members of your partner. It's a little bit of an unwanted name calling. You're just like your dad. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree kind of thing. Take a look at the second statement. Wow, it surprised me that you actually are capable of taking the laundry out into the laundry basket. Impressive. I can tell you that's very irritating. Honestly, if you do that to me, I'll be very irritated, because that is very unwanted sarcasm. I try to do something nice, and do you really have to be sarcastic over there? Taking a look at all these statements, you might be able to pick up the tone in these statements. They can come across as quite condescending, disrespectful, and perhaps really mean. Okay? And contempt doesn't come just in the verbal form. Let me show you. You think about talking, right? I'll show you some non-verbal communications about contempt. Do you all see what's happening over there? They didn't say a single word. Contempt sometimes also comes in the form of non-verbal. Think about when someone gives you a sneer or "come I clap for you" gesture. I think enough said solely just from the non-verbal. Let's take a look at the third horseman. Here comes the third horseman. Horseman. When criticisms and contempt come too often, that is almost a very, very open ticket for defensiveness to gallop in. Almost reflexively, when we believe that we are being attacked, we are not likely to just sit there and not attempt to at least protect ourselves. Partner who feels that they are being criticized very often try to justify their behaviors, and this in turn tends to lead to the other party feeling quite dismissed, invalidated, and their feelings are unimportant. I had so much to do today at work. Why is it that it is always have to be me who is settling things in our relationship? Okay, so you see that sometimes when people get defensive, it can end up in reverse blaming. For example, the second statement, all I wanted was to help you out. It started off very innocently, why I did what I did. I wanted to help you out. And I completely don't understand why you have to keep up a big fuss all the time. So it's almost like you're flipping the table onto the other person. And that's what we tend to see very often when defensiveness comes in. As I mentioned, it is actually human nature to protect ourselves, particularly during stressful period. This act of defensiveness can come very quickly. And what we need to pay attention to is if we keep engaging in this way of communicating. We cannot work on the conflict directly because after all, when I'm saying that you are at fault and when you are saying that I'm at fault, what happens is no one is taking responsibility in this situation. And if no one is taking responsibility in this situation, each party is blaming the other person. It's almost like saying who is willing to back off first. And as usual, more often than not, no one wants to give in. This very constant competitive streak usually does not leave quite a good taste in the mouth over time. So it's always like both parties find that I come back off, you come back off, and they kind of go into a deadlock very, very often. Okay, so take attention to all these three horsemen, because the next horseman I'm going to present you is very often the consequence if these three horsemen are not well taken care of. Over time, once one party figures out how communication is like between you and me, one of the likely consequences that I tend to see people going into, and I have to say that among the four horsemen, this is probably the one that I find couples struggling most with. It is one of the toughest horsemen to attend to, and that's stonewalling. It's almost coming to a point of someone thinking, there's no point talking. I don't want to talk anymore. No matter how we talk, it's not going to make a difference. Very often, this is a learned behavior. Like I mentioned just now, it could be a consequence of interacting with the current partner because of all the experience that he or she has gathered from the usual way of communicating. This person might come into this point in time in thinking, no point, or at least not now. It can also come from observing parents' interaction, looking at how our parents tend to interact as a couple. Sometimes we have also learned to shut up because don't talk when unnecessary because you don't want to invite trouble. So sometimes it's a learned behavior. It can also be a learned behavior from past relationship. If let's say we, because of our past relationship, realize that some way of communicating tends to escalate the issue than not, it's almost human nature that we don't want trouble. We detach ourselves, we disconnect ourselves from communication. So if I'm going to get blamed, if I'm going to get put down or attacked, I cannot do this. I'm backing off. You tend to see people who engage in stonewalling goes into a withdrawal from interaction, and very often they don't attend to the issues at hand. Before we wonder why do you have to do this, I would like to maybe invite all of us for a moment to position yourself in that position. It's human nature once again, and I can't emphasize enough that sometimes in a relationship it's important for us to remember and to empathize with the other party and empathize with ourselves that we do fall into such pitfall every now and then. So if you position yourself in a position of feeling threatened by the interaction, almost instinctively, you go into a flight or fight mode. For people who are stonewalling, they tend to go into the flight mode where they disengage from the interactions. They are very often overwhelmed physiologically and psychologically that they find it very hard. And indeed, when someone is in a highly aroused state, it can be very hard to think logically, which can eventually lead to a very vicious cycle of not wanting to communicate. Some ways of stonewalling can look like, using statements like, never mind, it's okay, I'm sorry, let's just drop it, all right? And some, just like contempt, it doesn't necessarily have to be verbal. Some ways of people not engaging, stonewalling, it can also take the form of how people start to stay late at work in order to avoid communication. They start to, whenever you talk to them, they start to use their mobile phone, they start to scroll. Honestly, I've seen how sometimes in my therapy room, After a while, you kind of get it. You see that person keeps scrolling the phone and basically not doing nothing much. That's almost a way of signaling that, hey, what's going on over here? Is this a heightened state of arousal for this particular individual? So sometimes people go into playing games and say, no, I'm listening. That's a way of really engaging them and to anchor them into that state of feeling highly anxious and highly aroused. So keeping silence, using singular words, etc., etc. So by and large, you will be able to see a general pattern that this person is almost sending a signal to tell you, I can't do this right now. It usually does take a while for the negativity created by the first 3 horsemen to become overwhelming enough for stonewalling to happen. But like I mentioned earlier on, when it does happen, very frequently, it becomes kind of a bad habit that is kind of a little bit, in fact, I would say, quite difficult to break out of. So these are the 4 horsemen.